Is record? Is it recording? I guess it is.
Yes.
Cool, awesome. Well, welcome everybody to the Evolution meeting on September 9th, 2020. I know that there's some stuff from last week that you guys were talking about that Sean told me about. Sorry that I haven't been on the calls for a while. I was working my internship, which was all day, every day, so I didn't have time to make these calls. And then after it ended, I just had some personal stuff and school getting started up, so I wasn't able to make it for a couple weeks in a row. But I'm back for good now, at least until something happens again. So
welcome back.
I won't have. Yep. I won't be able to drive too much today, but I'm happy to help take notes if there's particular things we want to talk about from last week. I know Sean mentioned that you guys were talking about changing the language of reviews was one thing that he mentioned. Did I remember that correctly?
Yeah, so there are two main agendas in this. One is changing the name and other is on dependencies.
Okay. Dependencies, like code dependencies or like intermetric dependencies?
In general, all
interword.
dependencies.
Code dependencies is what, so dependencies becomes a focus area, and then evolution can decide how they want to, what metrics they want to create to look at dependencies.
Okay.
And then the interesting thing about dependencies is that we're going to try to run that as a focus group or a focus area in different working groups. Mm-hmm. And each working group will look at that focus area from a different perspective. So it's a bit of an experiment. Mm-hmm. So regarding our agenda about dependencies, we want to think about how we would explore dependencies within evolution. What are the metrics that are important to us? What is the question that evolution would want to answer about dependencies?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Have we, I do see some stuff down here. I'm looking at the agenda from the meeting on the 26th. Is this all just brainstorming about?
Yes.
Like what we could look at? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
That was also kind of the conversation about does dependencies even belong in evolution? Maybe it's a risk metric. Maybe it's a value metric. And through this discussion, through the discussion last week, I think we took it to the community meeting and we kind of decided that we were going to kind of do the experiment and try to run dependencies as focus area in all the working groups or in whichever working groups want to do it.
Okay.
So.
Okay. And that was just this past week, the community meeting, right? So we're still very early on in the stages of this experiment?
Yep. Very early.
Okay.
And my guess is that if we can establish a question that we want to answer, we will probably be the first working group working on dependencies. I don't think that conversation has really been had yet anywhere else.
Okay.
Maybe we can see like what kind of dependencies evolution working group is looking for.
Sorry, can you say that again, Vinod? I missed that. I'm
saying like what kind of dependencies evolution working group is looking for in their focus area.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
like,
isn't that us? Aren't we the evolution?
Yes. Yes.
So are you saying
I'm focusing it to the evolution. So, okay, in the process of project evolution, is project dependent on anything, be it libraries, be it code, or be it people, whatever. So what is our as a evolution group focused on the dependencies? What can we think? That's what I'm trying to brainstorm here.
Mm-hmm. What was I going to say? I think breaking up the types of dependencies that we want to look at just overall probably would be helpful. And then we can kind of further refine and say, these are the types that we want to look at. That's one we could go about it. We could also just go about trying to think of generic questions that we would want to answer related to dependencies and also evolution, and kind of tackle it from that way. Is there, how did the discussion about dependencies come about? Did somebody specifically ask, like, hey, somebody outside the community say, I want dependency metrics? Was it just we brought it up in a meeting and it kind of just evolved into this, let's try this out because it seems curious?
We've been getting requests from outside of the community to start exploring dependencies. And I think those requests also match some interest from within the community to explore dependencies as well. But I think the thing that started us down this conversation was a request from outside the community, I believe.
I think it was request from Asia Pacific meeting, especially.
Okay.
Yeah, possibly.
Okay, so I have a question we could answer. So something like, how do dependencies affect the project velocity? So in other words, if there are more dependencies or more outside libraries or projects that we're dependent on, a project is dependent on, does that enable a project to move faster, to close issues faster, to ship releases faster? Is that kind of what we're talking about, I think, with regard to dependencies and evolution specifically?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. Should we or is this being documented in the
Yes. I just read it. Would you say that you could phrase the, you guys want me to share my screen? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay, let me do that. I'm surprised I hadn't before. So this is how I phrase that, Elizabeth. How do dependencies affect the project velocity, and does having more or less of, is that the main distinction, like more or less, or maybe like a certain type, or so even a specific dependency? Like, can we say that projects that use this framework have some sort of common thread? Is that kind of the right idea?
Yeah, I think any of those questions would be valid to answer. The number of dependencies, the types of dependencies, the dependencies themselves specifically. I think, yeah, all of that stuff would be interesting to look at.
Okay. I had something that was related to that. It was something like, are there dependencies that, I think like tracking maybe looking at what dependencies get added and dropped as a project matures. Like if they start using Flask and then they drop it for Django, or they drop it and switch to their own, home-rolled dependency for, to do some web requests or something. I think that could be an interesting question. Like, can you look at a project's dependency chart and kind of get an idea of what else was happening? Kind of. Does that make sense? I'm not exactly sure how you would answer that question, or if you could, but.
Are you asking about like a more stable dependency, like a dependency that has a healthy velocity itself? Is that what you're talking about? So like as a project matures, maybe they switch to using something that is also maturing along with them, or I'm not sure if I said that right.
My internet connection isn't stable. That's annoying. Sorry. I think that is an interesting question, actually. Like looking at this project is maturing and so is this one, and they're both getting adopted at the same rate or something like that. But I think my question is more focused on, like, can you use the changes in a project's dependencies as a proxy for other events that happened, like, or to make some, like, to say they switched frameworks or they dropped a bunch of dependencies and now it's more mature because they took the time to do this, or it's less mature because they added a bunch of dependencies because they just added a bunch of dependencies out of nowhere. Like, you know, can you make those kinds of those calls just looking at the dependency graph? I also don't know if this relates exactly to dependencies, and it's not exactly a specific question, but I think it would be interesting to also think about in the context of dependencies, package managers in some form, like maybe, you know, presence on package managers, presence in like third-party package managers. Like, do I have to add, like, if it's a apt package and it's not in the main, you know, repository, does that, well, I'm sure it affects adoption, but, like, you know, is that significant that it is or it isn't in this package manager's index or something like that? Just as a general concept, I think that could also be an interesting space to explore related to dependencies. But unless you guys feel like that's kind of too far outside the realm of specifically dependencies.
I think that's super interesting. I don't know what that metric would look like. Maybe it's multiple metrics within kind of a subcategory within dependencies.
There was Augur at one point used a project called libraries.io, which you guys might have heard of. It did a bunch of, it just had like a huge index of what packages needed what other packages across a huge, like quite a few different platforms. Like they had Ruby gems, they had Python packages, they had Node and stuff in there. I'm trying to remember, we built some metrics from that like a really long time ago.
It
I
was,
don't know if I can.
yeah, I worked on that. I helped that get it up, set up. So it was a V index which I developed for the dependencies.
That's right. That's right. I totally forgot about that, Bernard.
I think maybe another interesting question would be around contributors. So like, if there are more dependencies, does that also increase the number of contributors because people might be familiar with one of those packages or one of those dependent pieces of software? You know, like thinking of like frameworks and things like that, would that expand the pool of potential contributors, or would it make the waters muddier? I think that would be kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, I would never thought of that. So like, is there a relation between the numbers of contributors and dependencies in the context of like, you know, if there are more dependencies, then there's a higher chance that contributors would be willing or able to contribute because they understand these packages, but also it muddies the water. Is that kind of like,
yeah,
I'm just trying to make sure I captured your thought.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, like if someone is using a framework that is really popular, does that also expand then your pool of people that would be able to contribute, or would it just make it more confusing and then therefore less contributors? I think that'd be interesting.
I saw this core periphery and episodic contributors when I was skimming the notes last time. Can somebody just give me like a elevator pitch on what the difference between those three is? I have an idea of what I think they mean,
So
but I
that
just
that
want
is actually based on what Elizabeth was saying, and it's also based on a
to.
comment that she had made in the last meeting. Core, periphery, and episodic contributors are a way of understanding where a contributor exists within the project. And then what can be interesting about that is when you look at dependencies, or when you look at individuals that are contributing to other projects, if you have projects that are dependent upon one another, a core contributor from one project could be a peripheral contributor to another project that has some sort of dependent relationship, right? So by understanding the core, periphery, and episodic contributors, you can actually kind of map a picture of what interdependencies look like based on contributor contributions.
Okay, so just to make sure that I understand. So like if you could say I'm a core contributor for Augur, but if there's a sub repository that's a side project of Augur that loosely depends on it, and I make only a couple commits, I would be a core contributor for Augur and periphery for the other thing. Is that,
right?
Did I understand it correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, that is interesting. That made me think of something else, but I don't. What was it? It was something to do with. Well, maybe one thing that also we could look at would be like kind of dependency chart to project to code base size. That's not really an evolution metric, I don't think. That's just kind of, I don't even know if that would tell you anything. Nah, I'll think about that one.
I'll just leave it for now.
Okay.
Maybe it'll
spark something.
Oh, I added a goal, by the way. Is this goal fair to understand how project dependencies affect growth, maturity, and decline?
Yep, I would say so.
Okay.
Do we want to specify a kind of dependency, like code dependency or like contributor dependency, or should we just leave it generic and say we'll focus within a metric or within a more specific sub area?
I think that's kind of up to us. I don't know if I would. I guess which working group owns contributors? Or
my guess is, I think, is it common?
Is that common? Yeah. So there might be.
So
to be honest with you, that the ratio of core, periphery, and episodic contributors and anything to do with contributors might actually might fit better in common. But I think we can still come up with these ideas and let common decide if they want to work on those.
I think for us, it'll be more if we look at the version dependencies, because in the evolution phase of project, like from growing to maturing and maybe declining, are we depending on the different versions of the dependencies in the code? Like if you're using a certain library, there's like every library has different versions. So in the evolution phase, are the version dependencies also evolving, or they are staying constant?
So I'm hearing that you kind of want to focus on code dependencies.
Yes.
And I think that's completely fair.
That made me think of something. Oh my gosh. it was related to the dependencies evolving and changing. Oh gosh, what was it? It'll come back to me.
Hey, Kevin, did you add that blurb right there? Did you add that to the common working group agenda? I can if you didn't.
Which blurb?
The one, the comment that you have there where it says maybe common.
Oh, no,
highlighted
I
section.
haven't. Nope, I haven't
Okay.
added that.
I'll just drop it in their agenda to bring up in case they want to look at it.
Okay.
I had a really good question, and I totally forgot it. It's aggravating. Whatever. Oh, maybe it was. I think it was related to, maybe it's it would also be interesting to try to classify code dependencies even further. Like, this is a framework. Like, this is a dependency you have one of in your, you have one of these types because this is the framework that you use, and then you have some like maybe utility ones, or maybe you have like some in-house dependencies that you've rolled. Like, are there ones that we can say are definitively for, like, you know, maybe doing form input or documentation?
Yeah, this is a documentation dependency. This is a UX dependency. This is a.
So it's like categorization of the dependencies.
So yeah, types of dependencies or categories of dependencies.
Oh, I remember what my question was. I think it might also be interesting to try to look at like all of the downstream dependencies from a project. Like, you know, out of all the projects that use React, if you know, I think the most interesting ones to look through, it's like how many still use an unsupported version. Like, you know, I don't know what version React is on, but if like we're on React 10 and long-term support for 6 has stopped, you know, how many projects are still on 6 and below, or just how many are at the different versions? You know, is there a pretty wide, you know, we have people using it from 2 years ago, and also the most recent update is most everybody using after a certain date or after a certain version, or is it, you know, like almost everybody is using the up-to-date version? I think that would be that could be an interesting question.
Something like that. Or is that way too simple?
How many versions of a dependency? Actually, I think that's 2 questions. How many versions of a dependency are supported? And also, how many of those versions, or for each version, how many downstream dependents still use that version? I think that's actually 2 questions.
Yeah, yep.
I think what I'm getting from this conversation is like we are focused on the code dependency or library dependency, and we are having different filters in that. So with that in mind, I think it's a good idea to, if we start like brainstorming code dependency in a template, like developing a code dependency as a metric. And in that we see, okay, what are the different filters that can help us answer these kinds of questions?
You think this is just one metric with a bunch of different filters?
Especially, yes, because like version dependency is related to the code dependency or library dependency, or like, and downstream is also connected to that, yeah, having a different kind of filter in that.
I might be seeming pedantic here. I apologize for that if that's the case. But I guess I'm not sure where the line is between what the risk working group would be concerned with versus us in evolution. Like, because that to me seems more of like a risk category or something that they would be concerned about, you know, just for potential bugs and holes and security vulnerabilities, not necessarily the growth of the project. But I could be totally wrong.
So in my mind, I've always kind of felt that the easiest way to differentiate risk from evolution is production versus use, where the risk metrics are about usage, and the evolution metrics are kind of about production. So that's the way I think about it. So that may actually be incorrect.
Well, I think it's pretty helpful. So if it is incorrect, then that's a shame, because that actually is really helpful.
This is like, I really like this distinction because it's clear, because I always felt like risk and evolution are very interrelated, but this is a like fine line between them. Evolution is more on the production and risk is on like assessments or use.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's
Maybe
fair.
we should note it down, the difference between evolution and risk.
Well, obviously, there's a little bit of blurriness in between them because
Yes,
you can mitigate risk on the production end. So you do have to address risk, but just generally speaking, risk metrics are directionally, they're almost viewing it from the outside, whereas evolution metrics are kind of viewing it from inside the project.
so it's like more of a cyclical where risk is suggesting different bunch of things based on their assessment, and evolution can adopt them in the course of time in the development.
So there are two.
To what? Sorry, I might have missed the rest of it.
Yeah, I actually wrote two questions here.
Huh.
And I think they're both the same question, just written from different perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah.
A question, do we have a code dependency or library dependency or like package dependency? So I feel like in software development, like you use the library as a other source on which you rely on and use it in your own software, or we just copy the code from other software and use it in our
Code dependencies. So the first one I wrote here, I think that's almost a risk question, right?
I think this.
And then the second one, this is probably the evolution question.
That is also a risk question too.
Right. So how many projects are dependent on our project, right? So
yeah.
No, this could be about growth, right? So as my project matures, more people are dependent upon my project. Whereas this other one, how many code dependencies does my project have? Like how many pieces of code are we dependent upon? That's more of a risk question.
I felt like both are very same. Both can be for risk and for evolution. Like if they are depending on your code and they are depending on your project, both is still people or project are depending on your project or your code.
Mhm.
I think you could also make the case that that could belong in value as well, because like
Yes.
how much value is your project spewing out into the world?
The Evo one could also be value, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
That one.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Mhm.
So maybe we should ask comment about that one as well, since we kind of made a few, I don't know.
That's where it's getting more blur, that it is involving all different working groups.
I agree. First of all, it definitely going through this, I think it's become very clear that there's I mean, obviously there was a lot of cross-pollination, but one thing that I thought about while you're talking about that is, and I don't mean to totally change the subject away from this, but the idea of a code dependency versus, like, the term code dependency versus a library or package dependency, I think we should maybe at least put down, like write down that we should think about that language difference, because you could almost say that a code dependency is if I write one class that does some functionality and then another class that depends on that class to provide some functionality, that's a code dependency. But I think what we're mostly talking about is libraries or packages, like Vinod said. Like, I take this source code from, or I take this code that somebody else wrote completely, that's not part of my project, and incorporate it into mine. I think there are definitely interesting questions to be answered about both of those types. And I think both can very easily fit into evolution, but it's just like a minor language thing that I thought about that might be a distinction that would be useful in some contexts.
So, for example, if I take if somebody else has written a class, I've taken that class and used it in my own program writing. I have just taken the class, but now I'm not depending on that class. So if that class is updated or not, that doesn't affect my code because I just copied as exact code. Whereas in terms of library, I'm pointing to that library and I'm relying on that library. If that library gets updated and my pointer gets broken, that is a difference, isn't it?
I mean, I agree, but I would be fascinated to see the cases where directly copying one class from the source code of a library would give you the functionality. Like, I'm not sure how often that happens, because I don't know how often that would work. I agree that they're different things, and that it would be hard to, they're both a dependency, but I've never just copied the source code for another library and dropped it into mine and made it work. I'm not sure that's.
I don't think
Did I
that is like.
understand you correctly?
Yes, you understand me correctly, but what I'm trying to communicate is there are different developers who just don't want to use the entire library. A particular class is useful to them, and that's where they feel like this is only functionality I can get from this particular thing, and I just copy that code and embed it in my program instead of like relying on the whole library, which carries a lot of weight and memory things. That's what I'm trying to.
Oh, okay. I think so. Are you saying more like I'm only using this very one specific thing from this library versus using like a lot of things from this library?
Yes.
Okay. I understand you now. Yeah, I think that's also actually a great point, is that there's even weights to how much you depend on a project. Because, like, yeah, if I depend on this library for one, it's, I need a helper function to do this one weird date time calculation in one part of some optional path in my application. It's different than if it's the main framework I built my entire application around. I don't know if that's exactly what where you were getting at, but that's what that made me think of.
So what I was trying to communicate from this was like code dependency is, I don't know, I just copy the class, but I'm not depending on it. Whereas in library or in package, I'm relying on that entire package. If that gets updated or changed, I'm still like my links will be broken, or my entire software is going to be broken if there is a change in that library or package.
Would an API dependency be a third thing?
Yes.
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 Actually, because you don't even have any control over that.
Yeah, I think that's what exactly, like in library, we copy the library in our software, whereas in API, we are not copying, we are just making a call. And if there is a change in the API, there's a more broken dependency chances.
But that is still a dependency.
Yeah.
And if you are talking about code dependency from that lower level of granularity, is just at the level of abstraction, not really different from library dependency. Because if you go to a library, you start having classes, functions, method, and things like that. So it all depends on, from the discussion line, it all depends on the level of granularity.
Okay.
Maybe
not in terminology.
Maybe is that our first? Are those our first three metrics then? Code dependency, package dependency, and API dependency.
Yeah, maybe.
And we just treat them as frequency counts to start, and maybe add some filters.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be interesting. I think.
And then any other metrics that we have can build on those once we've defined those three kind of base things.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful to define these three first, or maybe even if there are other types we want to include, like, I don't know, platform dependency. Like, are you a Facebook plugin? Or I don't even know if that's a thing. Like, are you a browser extension? Do you depend on the existence of some other third party for your application? Okay, that was a bad way to phrase that. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Like,
that's a technology dependency.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, it's a platform dependency, like iOS dependency or Android dependency or Linux dependency or Windows dependency, kind of.
So platform/technology dependency. And then once we start talking about that, there's probably a language dependency too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we have 5 different types of dependencies that we have identified. And for the most part, they're probably just frequency/identification metrics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you count the number of dependencies and you maybe list what they are.
Mm-hmm.
So that not too complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing we also discussed is the grouping dependency. So is it like, are we depending on the container? Are we depending on the documentation? Are we depending?
Oh, container dependencies. Is that would that fall into packaging?
So when we are talking about container dependency, is that not a kind of nullifying the policy why we are using container to begin with? For example, Docker tries to solve all this problem of dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but it's basically a package manager. So doesn't that kind of fall under package dependencies?
Okay, like the NPM, the brew, and the pipe thing, the pip.
Yes.
Okay, so we have to really make a distinction between infrastructure dependency, like the infrastructure as a code, like Docker, Kubernetes, and things like that.
So would Docker fit as a platform dependency then?
I think Docker, I think you could make the argument that it would fit as a platform. Yeah, I think that would be, that wouldn't be that weird.
I think it is lower than the platform. It's like it is providing you a basis for a platform.
So
it's more of an infrastructure, which is a kind of different from a platform.
Yeah.
So is
a
platform would be part of infrastructure, right?
Infrastructure will be part of a platform because it rests on a platform. For example, if you have a 32-bit machine, let's say, you know, and someone has a 64-bit, then that is a problem of compatibility, and you know, you can start talking about problem of dependency and things like that. But Docker sits on any of these platforms without any, you don't have to worry about those dependency anymore.
Okay, so that we add another one that is infrastructure dependency.
Yeah.
So we have code dependency, package dependency, API dependency, infrastructure dependency, platform technology dependency, and language dependency.
Yeah, that quickly blossomed. That quickly from 3 to 6. Not to add another one, but this probably could fall more under common, but and we kind of talked about just the idea of people dependency, like almost like a buzz factor.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is already in the discussion for even that is for the value, like or for the risk also, like how many people are we dependent on. So it's a buzz factor maybe.
What could also be interesting, and again, this probably does not fit here, but I'll just put it out there anyway. People dependency, but not in terms of code or buzz factor, almost maybe like a leadership. Like, you know, we have dependency on the CHAOSS governing board and the leaders of the working groups. Like, obviously that's much more nebulous than what we're talking about here, and probably warrants a whole other discussion. But that's something that I thought about, is like, you know, I'm sure you have the code dependencies for the people that are writing the code, but what about the people that are doing all the other work behind the scenes, like leadership, like project direction or planning or outreach, or you know,
we could have organization. We could have organization dependencies and funding dependencies as well. But I think those probably fit in a lot of those. I think fit in common if they look at the contributor and organization dependencies, then those good fit for common.
I totally agree. We've got what, 4 minutes left, 4 or 5 minutes left. I think that these different types of dependencies that we've been talking about for the past couple of minutes are our first metrics. I think they're good candidates for the first metrics, just because they'll allow us to say, like, okay, these are the types of dependencies we have, and then after we flesh these out a little bit, we can then start to put filters on them and start to think about them more robustly, maybe in terms of each other, or more focused things related to these dependency types. How do you guys think? Or how do you guys feel about that?
Yeah,
going forward.
I like it.
Okay.
So maybe if we go to the Excel sheet of the evolution where we have focus areas. So where do we? Yes. Where are we going to fit them as a proposed metric?
So I don't. Per previous discussions, I don't think we want to add any metrics to this that aren't being worked on.
Okay.
I could be, Elizabeth, am I remembering that wrong?
But there is
I
a
think
column,
you're right.
Considering column is there. So we can, okay, if we are considering
that's considering for release though. That's not considering as a metric. So there was some worry that this document is how we kind of organize and collaborate for our release of metrics. If this document becomes a document just full of ideas for metrics, then it's going to get kind of noisy. So we don't want to put the metric in unless we are actually working on creating it.
So if you look at the definition on the very top, the third row, considering nothing there, let's focus on it. So it's nothing there. We brainstorm those 6 possible metrics, and let's consider it now, or let's refine them further.
Okay,
That's what
I'm basing this on the previous discussions that we've had recently. So,
yeah, I definitely, I agree with the language maybe is not super clear. It means considering for release, but I think Kevin's point about using this only for things we are definitively working on that we want to release and not using it as a work in progress is
to
probably
catch
the best
ideas.
idea, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't use it to just catch ideas.
Yeah. I think eventually they'll make their way in here, but for now it might be better to just have some, that's like a space down here, or maybe we can capture some of these metrics, or maybe we just, I mean, we have it here.
I think
for later.
To start, do we want to create Google Docs around these? And I mean, because once we have a Google Doc created,
I agree with Kevin.
If we create a Google Doc for it, then I would actually say, hey, we're working on these, and then to Vinod's point, I think we throw them in there with the Google Doc link and throw considering on it.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to communicate. Like my step was first put it here and have a Google Doc, but it's other way around. Okay, let's create a Google Doc and put it here in the Excel sheet.
Yeah, I would just wanted to make the point that we don't want to use it to capture ideas.
Yeah, of course not. I suggested those based on like, okay, we have these 6 anticipated metrics for the dependencies.
Okay, I think we're at time. We're at 9:50. Share my screen. Before we head off, is there anything else? Also, wait, we did shorten the meetings to 50 minutes, right? I'm not just imagining that.
No, you're not imagining.
No, you're right.
Yeah, we're done.
Okay. I feel like this was really productive today. I think we got a long way, and I'm happy we're working on getting some of these metrics maybe started. I'll work on making those Google Docs so we can index them in the metric sheet.
Okay. So when you make them, will you send a link on the mailing list so that we can just start getting on it?
Yep, definitely. Absolutely. Okay. And if nobody sees that from me soon, please feel free to reach out and ask if I've done it yet. I might need a reminder.
Okay.
If you add the links to if we have Google Docs for them and you add the links to the Excel sheet, you could just send out a link to the Excel sheet and just say, hey, we've added these dependency metrics. That way you don't have to send out a ton of links.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, everybody. It was good talking to you guys. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and see you again soon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.